Please give a huge hand of applause to Lindiwe.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so honored to be here, and I would like to thank Dr. Hisham for the invitation and the team at IMD who've been really kind and treated me so well and speak so highly of me. I am nervous, so I don't think I am that awesome, but I thank you so much for the honor. My speech today, I'm really going to be talking to you about my journey and what inspires me and what drives me, and hopefully that some of you will join in helping somebody out there who maybe had the same background of me and their story was not, they didn't have anything that says one day you're going to be standing in front of all these amazing people in Dubai and staying in this beautiful 5-star hotel and meeting all these amazing people. But so the important thing is about when we see people and see potential, and sometimes all it takes is just being, just listen to somebody or just acknowledge them. It can really go a long way in inspiring them and encouraging them that one day they can stand here and mention you as one of the people who maybe you think you didn't do much, but just because of who you are can change somebody's future. I'm the youngest of 7 children. My mom died when I was 4 years old, and my father literally ran off with another woman, after my father's funeral after my mother's funeral to avoid the responsibility. We were raised by my grandparents, who were already pensioners in their 70s, and unfortunately for them, they ended up having to look after 12 kids, all under the age of 16, because my mom and her sister died 2 weeks apart, and my grandparents had to look after us. So you can imagine how challenging that was to look after kids that young during the height of apartheid as pensioners. I often joke that I grew up in a 4-bedroom house, but in fact it was actually a 2-bedroom. But at night, every room was a bedroom, including the kitchen. At least we had class. We didn't sleep on the bathroom, but every room was important, including the passage. I think if I look at myself, just being here, I shouldn't be standing here in front of you. I was really a poster child for poverty and disadvantage. And the reason I'm standing here is because my grandfather valued education. He always told us that if we stayed at school and worked hard, one day we would not even remember that we were orphaned. I graduated from one of Africa's best universities, the University of Cape Town. I sit on the President Ramaphosa's 4-hour commission, and I count an award from the Queen as one of my achievements. And that shows that indeed education is an equalizer. The World Economic Forum predicts that 60% of children entering primary school today will ultimately end up in jobs that do not exist today. And because the skills environment is changing so hard, so quickly, our education system also has to catch up. But unfortunately, it doesn't. The ability to learn and unlearn is important, but we can't achieve that if our education system treats children unequally based on their address, on who their parents are. In South Africa, only 13% of children who start grade 1 today will be able to apply for university entrance. By grade 3, kids from the poorest 60% of our school are already 3 years worth of learning behind learners from more affluent circumstances. Student science achievement dramatically declined between primary school and high school. By the time students graduate from high school, only 30% of them have developed the foundation they need to be able to apply scientific concept to the world around them. And this is not just a South African stat, it's the same thing in the US. When I was doing my research, I found actually the stats are exactly the same. The modern world, we know, does not reward us for what we know, but how we apply what we've learned. One of the most sort of sad stats that is applicable in South Africa, that in 2018, the Department of Planning and Monitoring tested primary school teachers. Only 5% of them passed math of the subject that they were teaching, only 5%. And only 10% passed English. So now, these are teachers, most of them from disadvantaged communities. So then how can a child whose teachers can't even understand what they're teaching them will be able to, to compete? And when we're talking about children in affluent areas and poor communities, it's not that the kids in affluent areas are smarter or brighter than those kids. It means that they've got access to the best teachers, the best school, and the parents, I think like most of you probably invest so much in your kids before they get, most of the time I laugh when I meet parents when my kids started grade 1, how they will tell me, my child learned to read when they were 4 years old. It's things that we actually brag about. And for women, sometimes I always say that you find that some of us will say, my daughter could sing, like Rihanna by the time they were 3 months old. And that's really because we try that, as early as possible to invest in our kids, and that's because of the resources that we have. I founded Africa Teen Geeks 6 years ago after attending an executive program at a school that I won't mention. I was exposed to an 8-year-old girl who had just created an app. And I was sitting there, I was so inspired looking at this girl, and as she was speaking, I started Googling, what was happening with coding and, in our schools. And I was shocked to learn that only 5% of our school, like that in 2014, well, it's still the same stats now, teach IT. And those schools are mainly in affluent areas. And there are obviously good reasons for that, is because, as I mentioned earlier, the lack of qualified teachers, and then lack of infrastructure, lack of internet in poor communities. So at that time, actually by the time this child was done, I had Googled and then decided that's how Africa Teen Geeks was born. And I also Googled the CEO of Microsoft at the time. I'm very good with Google. I think I can find Jesus' email if he had one. And I found his email, and I emailed him, and at the time I said, this is who I am, and I'm sitting here, I'm listening to this child, and I'm looking at the stats, and they're really shocking, and I want to see if you would be interested in helping us to set an organization like this. And I see, Microsoft globally, they've got some program that teaches kids how to code. This is what I want to do. And to my surprise, he actually immediately responded and said, we would like to meet. Where, are you available? And then I said, well, I'm in the US, but I'm coming back, on Wednesday at the time. And then he said, okay, linked me with his PA. And as soon as, literally when I landed from the airport, I went straight from the airport to his office before I went back to my house. And then we had our first grant. And at that time, we were not even registered. So it was, okay, go register now, put together the system. And we had our first grant to start our first class. And when we started our first class, I was excited. I met the people at the South African Broadcasting Commission, went there and I said, I want to start the classes at the University of South Africa, who were very kind, because I also Googled to see which institutions that can help us to bring the kids that had the internet and the resources. And UNISA was the best because they had 24 labs nationally. And they were also in small areas and rural areas because they are a distant learning institution. And I was excited. SABC came on board. They did live reads. We did interviews. We were excited. We thought when we get there, we're going to have thousands of kids ready to come to our class. That didn't happen. And I didn't understand because, we went to the vernacular radio stations. We're on radio, which the majority of our population, listened to. And I was shocked when I went to the class, and most of our labs were empty. And because we specifically said we wanted children from disadvantaged communities, they were not there. And as a researcher myself, and I thought there must be a good reason for this. I want to find out why. And I just did a short research, and I found that the reason our labs were empty was because a lot of the parents could not afford the taxi fare to bring their kids to the labs. And it was really like eye-opening. I think we realized most of the time when you think of, okay, there's an opportunity, you're thinking of creating an opportunity. And what sometimes we don't think about is most people that sometimes that we create these opportunities for will not be able to access it. So when we created it, for us, the strategy was now we can't just think about creating opportunities and also and say that, okay, everybody has an equal opportunity so they can get this. But the point is, most of the people that want to get this opportunity are just unable to get it, not because they're not interested, not because they don't want. And that's what changed in terms of the way we created our programs was I started thinking even about myself to say, if I'm gonna have this program, would a young Lindiwe be able to come here? Because, growing up, we were so poor that sometimes just having a meal was a plan, where you're gonna go ask for just a simple thing as match that time was 15 cents. Sometimes you couldn't even have that 50 cents to go buy it. So if you're gonna make fire, you're gonna have the wood, which is the only thing that was free, and then you have to go get match to light the fire. We didn't have, you have to go ask somebody, they'll give you one. And the box of matches, we never used to throw it away because when you go ask that, you'll get that one match and must come back and use it. You become also strategic because if you ban it and then it breaks and it doesn't work, you have to go back and ask for another one. Little things like that, like, learning how to light fire was an integral part of my growing up. And then you have to go look for coal. So you're gonna go to somebody's house and knock, can I have coal? And if you're gonna make tea, then you must go knock and ask for a tea bag. And then, and then go ask for somebody to give you sugar. And then at the time, you have that tea, but there was a plan, I would say an algorithm of how to make tea for a poor. Actually, I can write a great algorithm plan for poor kids to say, this is how you get to make tea if you don't have the resources. And now we at the point where we've actually have reached over 100,000 kids, by being intentional and making sure that kids can be able to access our plan. Like even with the way we teach coding as well was understanding that with the labs that we have, we've got a limited number of kids that can come and attend our classes. And what we did, I started working also with an institution that I won't mention, and we created a program called Need to Code. And that for me was, I realized that, growing up the way we did with my grandmother, she used to buy wool a lot. So, we didn't get to get a lot of clothes made for us. So she used to make jerseys and stuff. And I realized that a lot of kids in those communities probably have a grandmother or an aunt that knows how to knit. And then we created a program where we can teach the kids the basics coding through knitting. And we were able to link it to actually Python. So when a child is learning how to write a pattern, they can write a code for that, a Python code, where we teach them algorithms, where we teach them loop, because the similarities between knitting and coding, they're the same, right? And we started, for example, a loop, like the repetition, all of that is the same concept that you find in coding, you also found in knitting. And then we link that to Python now, where the child will write a Python code. If they knitted a scarf, if you take that code and you put it on a computer, it will draw what they've knitted, including the colors, if it will look exactly the same. What that meant was we don't actually have to go out and look for teachers. Their grandmother is a teacher. And when we start talking about getting more young girls interested in STEM, most of the time, like girls that are interested in STEM now, they'll be, told they've got a male brain. They don't feel comfortable in that sort of male-dominated industry. And sometimes having, somebody that can encourage them. And we thought, who is the better role model for a child than their mother or their grandmother? They've got so much influence in them. And we thought by teaching them and linking, coding and knitting, then these grandmothers and mothers, one can be the teachers, but also they can also encourage their girls and start talking to them about this STEM or whatever technical subject that they probably would not be able to talk to because they wouldn't know what an algorithm is. But when you explain an algorithm through knitting, they can get and they can understand, but it also makes the concept very easy for the child. I've had many conversations with people who believe that by including people of color or women means lowering the standard. South Africa recently won the World Cup, and Red Rugby World Cup, very proud, yay, with a black captain. But when he was appointed, there were so many people who thought he didn't deserve it, who thought by appointing him, he was a quota player, he was going to lower the standard. One of my favorite cricket player is Hashim Amla. When he was appointed as well to the national team, there were so many people who thought he didn't deserve it to be there. But today, he is one of the greatest, actually, I think he is the greatest opening batsman of all time in the world. He beats Brian Lara, who was my hero before Hashim came. So, but that kind of thinking that, you know, when you have somebody like that, maybe it's in, that would mean that you are lowering the standard. And most of us here also use VoIP to make business call, and probably that's one of the reasons most of us will stay connected after this session. But do you know that the person who has made it all possible is a woman? But most importantly, well, to me and to a lot of the kids that are, you know, people of girls of color that are underrepresented in STEM, is a black woman. Dr. Marian Croak has over 200 patents behind her belt, the majority of them related to VoIP. And she's also the reason some of us, if you love idols and you know, and you're voting for your favorite contestant, she owns the patent for that voting platform that we use for American Idol. And many people don't know that. And for a majority of, you know, the South African participants who are here, your children will be learning coding from grade R, you know, to 9 as a compulsory subject. And the person who's been working hard to make that possible is, you know, what some will call a diversity and inclusion candidate. A poor, you know, often, there's one magazine article once described me. The reason there's this coding and robotic curriculum is because I've worked tirelessly, not only to try and influence the government to say, let's teach coding to kids, but to raise the funding and the resources to make it possible for us to do so. Because when I went, obviously, we've got a lot of the challenges that we have as a country is, do you as a government invest in making sure every school has a computer lab when you still have kids that in rural schools that die just trying to go to the bathroom, you know, and we had kids that actually fell in pit toilets at school and died. So where is the balance? So you have to focus on the infrastructure, on the basic, you know, bread and butter. And I made it my mission to say, okay, so if you say, when I went to the minister and told them this is what I want to do, she said, well, we can have coding and robotics, but you must go out and raise the money for it because as government, we can't invest. And many people looked at me and thought, you're crazy. Why would you want to raise money for government? It should be the other way around. But for me, I understood, one, the importance of this, but also the fact that we know that coding actually helps in teaching kids the, you know, basic logical thinking, but also the skills that will help them to do well in math. When we look at our maths results, I was shocked when I learned that in matric, we'll talk about you know, the students that pass matric to be able to go to university. And there's only 30,000 kids pass well enough with a marks of 60% and upwards. And I was interested to find out how many of them were black in disadvantaged. Even in South Africa, we can't just say black, you have to say black in poor schools, because my child will probably do better because he goes to a good school. And I found that of the 30,000, only 1,500 that got 60% and up will be the kids from poor communities. So if we don't invest in making sure early on we can get the foundation, which as I've explained to you that we don't even have teachers that can teach the foundation properly, we have to find a different way of getting things done, but in making sure that we can, you know, equalize education. Currently, the life chances of an average child is not determined by their ability and the result of their hard work and determination. But one, for us in our context in South Africa, the color of your skin, your address, the wealth of your parents. While talent and creativity is equally distributed, opportunity is not. In 2017, MIT released a research called the Lost Einstein. It's a reference to people who could have had highly impactful innovations if they had been able to pursue the opportunities they deserved based on their talent and creativity. The researchers worked with the Treasury Department to link tax records with patent records. Doing so allowed them to study the backgrounds of patent holders. The researchers then linked those records to grade 3 math scores for the patent holders. Not surprising, children who excelled in math were far more likely to become inventors. By being a math standout, though, was not enough. Only the top students, who also came from high-income families, had a decent chance to become an inventor. So children who are exposed to a particular type of invention or an inventor have a higher chance of becoming one themselves. And the rates of innovations don't seem to be due to the innate ability to innovate. So now, can you imagine how many great ideas and brilliant people who could have contributed to society today didn't, purely because they were born on the wrong side of town or the wrong family? And this is really what drives me. This is what gets me out of bed today. This is what makes sure, the reason I've got 2 jobs that at this stage, and I feel like they're both demanding as much of my time. That's because I want to make sure that a lot of kids that were like me, or maybe, and most of them who don't have a grandfather like mine, who really believe in education and pushed me and refused to allow me to think that I wasn't good enough, to make sure that he exposed me to anything he could. If my grandfather was going at a funeral and met somebody who was a teacher, was a doctor, if he couldn't get that person to come to us and talk to us, he would make sure that he gets as much information about that person so that when he gets home, the first 2 hours will be a lecture about how amazing that young man was. And that was really important in terms of who we are as well, and also because he valued education and he was older, so he wasn't educated. When I was doing grade 1, my grandfather went back to school to learn to read. So when I was learning to read, I was learning to read with him. And that was so important because that also brought the culture of reading, and that every day we'll have to sit with him. And obviously because I was younger, I got the reading much quicker, and I became his official Bible reader because he was a pastor. So we would sit and read, and that's how I would say, was such an important aspect in terms of for me to become who I am today. And because of the importance of exposure, which is something that a lot of kids from poor communities doesn't have, we started working, as much as we teach kids, we started creating hackathons. And in 2017, I started working with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And I got an opportunity to also, before then, spend about 6 weeks in Silicon Valley as part of the Tech Women program. And while I was there, for me, the reason I joined that program was I wanted to meet a lot of so I was strategic in terms of why I was there, but my vision was I wanted to bring as many of the kids from these rural areas, these poor communities, to Silicon Valley and expose them to role models. So we created our first global hackathon in 2017, and we had kids from Bolivia, Indonesia, South Africa, the US, and I can be proud to say my South African kids won, and the youngest was 13, and these were all the kids from Township. And this year we had another of our global hackathon, which we hosted actually last week at the World Bank, where we had kids from Tunisia, also Mexico, and for all of those kids, it was the first time they traveled, they get in a plane. It was the first time they go to the US. So for them, just that entire experience was just eye-opening. And for me, that was really important because you can see how that changes the way they see themselves, how they start raising their aspirations. We have a program when our kids start at the beginning of the year. We ask them to do a vision board where we just give them a newspaper, say, put together a vision board and tell us if money was not an issue, what would you become? And you can see the kids that come from good families. They will be telling you immediately, I want to become, a lawyer, a doctor, a software engineer. And then you take a child to a township, they'll tell you, I want to become a waiter. I want to become a truck driver. And that's because that's what they've been exposed. And then at the end of the year, we ask the very same kids to write their vision board. And you can see from there, they've got a Bentley, they've got a big house. Even though they live in a shack themselves, they're going to be having dinner with Bill Gates. Beyonce is going to be their friend performing at their children's birthday party. But while those may not be true, I always believe that if you raised your aspiration, if you could dream of saying, I want to be an astronaut and fly the space shuttle. If you don't get there, the chances are you're going to be a pilot. And fly a plane. So you might fail higher than anybody who didn't have those aspirations. So it's so much important. And as I was talking to you about Dr. Marianne Croak, and when I found out what she's done, I started finding and making sure that I can find her. And when I was lucky, she turned out to be an amazing person. And she's currently the Vice President of Engineering at Google. And I asked her, and I said, I want you to come and help us create an innovation, summit, an event where we can create our own grasshopper celebration for young girls, of African descent, and get you to come. And we decided we're going to name the summit after her. So next year, she'll be taking her first trip to South Africa to spend time with 500 girls from African countries, that one, they will get to see a real innovator. And just being her, obviously, with all of the work that we'll be doing, we're hoping that a lot of kids now will see her and say, you know what, I can do that too. Because exposure and having a role model is so important. So when I talk about inclusion, I'm not talking about charity. I'm not talking about, I'm talking about decisions that also make great business sense. Research has proven that companies with diverse teams consistently outperforms companies that don't. And I think a lot of us, I'm sure most of you, utilize design thinking to innovate and to come up with great ideas. But design thinking has a human center at the core. It encourages organizations to focus on the people they are creating for, which leads to better products, services, and internal processes. So gathering information about your target consumer and is a critical piece of the design thinking process. Empathy, which requires you to really get to know who you are creating for. When I've done a lot of, when you look at the design thinking, one of the part that actually says that don't go there and ask questions because you try to get the answers that you want. It's really being humbled enough to let somebody teach you about themselves. And that requires you to be able to pay attention and admit that we don't know everything. Just because we're a Harvard graduate or you're IMD graduate doesn't necessarily mean that you're an expert in everything. And it's so important, especially when we create solutions for people. And I'm now going to just finally talk about the way we have approached the curriculum for South Africa. It wasn't really about, because for me, I thought that we are not just building for South Africa, we're building for Africa and a lot of other developing countries that faces the same problems that we do. And that meant that making sure that we create a curriculum that will reach everyone, but also, most importantly, reimagining the role of a teacher in a classroom. Because as I've mentioned earlier, you can see that for a lot of kids, the teacher is not really the source of knowledge, because most often than not, they don't have the knowledge themselves. And so we started looking at what could be the best way in which we can equalize or democratize education and make sure that a child, irrespective of where they come from, they can have access to quality education and the support that probably my child will have a tutor, but a child that is born in a poor area, the parents could not afford a tutor. So we then started building AI-powered VR Bing that will be really responsible for specifically math and science and English, and that will become a source of education, and it will be also child-centered, giving the parents as well an opportunity to see where their kids are struggling, but also become a teacher's assistant. And we've also built in a speech to that as well, so that it can sort of function more like a Siri or Alexa. When the child wants to ask a question, the first thing they go to is not really the teacher, it's just utilizing the platform. And we also made it also to be fully on mobile platform, and while we go on a fundraising drive to equip our schools with the resources, because if we launch the coding curriculum next year, it will literally only reach 10% of the South African kids that are currently at school, because the 90% do not have the resources that they will need to succeed. And our robotics curriculum as well, we thought we can't just go and buy kits, because personally, I don't believe that having a robotic kits actually teach the kids to be innovative. And I think as a country, for us to create employment, we need to have more young people that can innovate and can build things. And if you give them a kit and you say, make this, all you're teaching them is how to follow instructions. They'll be good at following, which is important, obviously, because if you're going to sit for an exam, you need to know, follow the instructions for you to pass. But if you also want to make sure we've got kids that are innovative, that will be entrepreneurial, that can make things, we need to teach. We focus on really rather teaching innovation, and it's cheaper. And if we teach engineering, it's cheaper, but it's also, every school can have a maker space and really encourage the children to be creative and build whatever, what they want, and hopefully we can come up with awesome programs from there. And the only thing that can ensure that we reach UN SDG 1 by 2030, which is to end poverty in all its form, is by democratizing quality education. To quote, in my opinion, one of the greatest men to ever live, Nelson Mandela, education is the great engine of personal development. It is through education that a daughter of a peasant can become a doctor, that a son of a wine worker can become the head of the mine, that a child of a farm worker can become the president of a great nation. It is what we make out of what we have, not what we are given, that separates one person from another. Let's give every child the gift of quality education, because humanity requires us to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So again, please send in your questions, and then I'm going to need to do this and that, because that's what happens at a certain age. So you gave us a number of elements that constitute the Africa Teen Geeks project. And again, it's a very sophisticated project, some of which is addressed to teachers, some of which is addressed at developing a curriculum, some of which involves universities. Of course, a big project also focused at girls, so the Girl Geek Contest. And here I just want to share with everyone a sentence that I read in the documents that I studied before our discussion, where you said they cannot become what they have never seen. And I thought that was quite a powerful comment. So again, you talked about the hack for justice and the hack for health. The knitting as coding, very, very clever, by the way, because the knitting as coding not only enables families where there's no computer, which, by the way, is, I think, I read 60% of folks in South Africa do not have a computer. And so, again, this is the overwhelming majority, particularly in less fortunate neighborhoods. But people do knit. And so not only that, but also you involve the ecosystem around the child, which I think is quite clever, because if the ecosystem is not supportive, then the child will not be able to continue to develop. So again, I just wanted to mention this briefly. You did not tell us anything about your other business. And of course, this was a choice that you made, right? And I guess it goes back to, again, the way you refer to your one job that pays the bills, which is, by the way, quite exciting. It's a great company you've built and you're continuing to build. But then one that feeds your soul. And in one of the articles I read, you said, my life is purpose-driven. A, what does that mean, that your life is purpose-driven? And B, how did it come to be this way?
I think I would say because of, my background, who I am, and every time when I will go home, I'm always reminded of how lucky I am. And that is something that really just gives me the ability to say, I have to make sure that every child should have an opportunity to, at least an equal opportunity to be able to get themselves out of poverty. And it's very impossible to break the cycle of poverty. And unless somebody who has, I don't believe that you have to be poor for you to be able to help or to understand. I believe that you have to care. And if you care, then you'll be able to understand that sometimes the resources that, what a child needs or somebody who's poor need is not always a handout. It's maybe somebody just looking at them and say, have you thought how amazing you are at this? And just helps to say, maybe this is how you can get yourself out. So just that little, could be maybe even a 5 minute, if you spend time and just to try to understand, that's what a lot of children and a lot of people need. Sometimes not just the money. Because if you don't have somebody that encourages you, as we were talking about the fact that you cannot become what you haven't seen, you can't. When I went to university, I was going to become a chartered accountant. And that's because, that's all I knew. That's what I was exposed to.
That's exciting too.
Yes, it is exciting. But because I met somebody who was a chartered accountant when I was at school, and then that person that's what I wanted to become. But then I go to university and I'm like, oh my God, then there's economics and the stats, and I'm amazed of all what I could have had, I could have become. I mean, one of my, now, if I had an exposure earlier, I probably would have become a forensic scientist. I love the Discovery ID channel, just when they can find a matter of my tiny hair. And I find it so fascinating. But I didn't know anything about it until I was late into my adult life. And I think I probably would have loved it because I'm a researcher, I'm curious, I love solving problems. So just exposing a child, just an exposure is so important.
I still haven't fully understood how you still develop this business, and you could be spending 90% of your time on that business, and that business would become even more successful, and maybe you could give some money to somebody else to do this. Why do you choose to devote such an important portion of your life to this particular cause?
I think I would just leave it to one word. I feel it's my calling, and because I care, I think, I can just leave it to that. Like, I feel like it's my calling. And I'm hoping that I can have more people to care, because every time when I've seen a lot of the children that have been part of our program, and those that were older when they started our program 5 years ago, and now are at universities and they're studying STEM. I mean, one of the kids that we had that we took to Silicon Valley with us lived in an orphanage all her life. And now she had somebody to look up. She started dreaming. She met people that she stopped seeing herself as somebody who's just waiting for somebody to help me. She stopped seeing herself, she stopped even describing herself as an orphan. Because sometimes the way we describe ourselves has a very big impact in terms of what we become.
Right, can be quite limiting.
Yes.
So one of the aspects is this extraordinary encouragement and gratification you get from seeing the effect of your work. Yes. Through these kids that develop and end up blossoming.
Yes, and I think also for myself, just having exposure and the people who took time to encourage me and what that meant. I explained to you earlier that, when I started my university, the first year, I was on a call with my grandfather because I was still waiting for the bursary money to come for me to buy books. I didn't have any books, and I was crying. I'm like, I'm the only one. I don't even have a pen and a writing pad. Can't you send me something? But he couldn't send me money. Then he had to wait until he got his pension. But as I was standing in that call, one of my professors was passing, and he saw me, and he listened to as I was crying on the phone, and he didn't say anything, and after class, he just called me and said, can you help me? I was carrying his stuff back to his office, and then he gave me the writing pad, and I didn't know at the time that he had me. And then he decided to spend a lot of time in helping me. I mean, I started becoming, he allowed me to become a babysitter for his kids so that I can have money, pocket money, to be able to do the things that he did. And he never told me any of that until after I had graduated. And for me, that was so special what he did, taking the time, but also the fact that he also understood that if he just said to me, oh, I just heard you crying, you don't have anything, probably the response would have been different, because as much as I was the way I am, I would have probably been embarrassed that he had that and he realized how poor I was. But because he just cared and helped me, and without even me knowing, that was so important. So I know just how, being just caring and being nice to somebody, and helping them out, how that can change their lives and their journey.
How much difference a mentor and a sponsor can make
Exactly.
to a child's life.
Yeah.
Do you ever get frustrated or discouraged? Do you ever doubt? How do you deal? I hope you do, otherwise the rest of us will feel really inadequate. How do you deal with those moments when you feel frustrated and potentially even discouraged?
Yeah, it's happened more often than not. When you're sitting and you've got so many things that you want to do, and there's frustration of the resources are not there.
That's reassuring for us.
Yeah, and maybe you're not, trying to explain things to some people and they don't get it, right? And but I have, I always give myself, like if I'm frustrated, I'll give myself an hour, what I call a pity party. I'll throw myself a pity party and just feel sorry for myself, scream, cry, do it, but then I know that, and that has been important.
That's an hour.
Yeah, that's an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, that's enough time. You just sit there, you feel sorry for yourself, you just think the world is bad, it just, whatever emotions I'm feeling at that moment, I just allow myself to feel it, and then after an hour, then it's time to say, okay, so this is what has happened, then I must now give myself a pep talk. I've become very good at that. I give myself a pep talk and encourage myself and say, things that I need to be said, and I will, reaffirm myself and say, there's a reason why I'm doing this. Things are gonna work out, and be strong, go out there, and that's it. And then
you go there.
Then I go there, and you try again, And also, I read a lot of also biographies. Of people who went through very, difficulties. I remember one of the first guy I met was the guy who founded Mahindra, the car, the Indian car. And I once heard in his interview talking about how he got bankrupt 4 times, and not like the Donald Trump bankrupt where I still have my penthouse, but literally have to lose his house, lose everything, and 4 times. And today Mahindra is one of the biggest, car makers in the world. And those are the people that inspire me, that because you're gonna fail, and having a positive relationship with failure, which is something that I always tell young kids, because sometimes we glorify the success, and then when I see you and I just see you are the president of IMD, and I'm thinking that must be your life, but there's a story to that, and the journey sometimes is not always spoken about. And also sometimes the media always talk about this person who made it, but they're not gonna tell us so much about, the journey of how hard it became. So those people that really struggled and failed many times and didn't give up and made it, those are some of the people that I always try, to remind myself and look. So if I failed, I'm like, okay, I'm only on 3, so maybe on the 4th, I'm gonna be my next Mahindra moment.
So let me try to get to some of the questions that have come through the app. One of them starts with thank you for the work you do. And then the question is, what are some of the insights you have gained from your work with Africa Teen Geeks in relation, in relation to how it can shape how we think of the 4th industrial revolution, both from a private sector and a public sector point of view. So if we think of 4th industrial revolution, and if we think of Africa Teen Geeks, what are some of the insights that we can take from your NGO to society at large?
I think some of the things that I find it kind of interesting is that people think that the 4th industrial revolution is still coming. But our life is already very much digital in everything that we do.
So it's not ahead of us, we're in it.
We are already in it, right? And just having the skills to be able, now being able to use a computer is not just a nice to have skill, it's a skill that you should have. But when you understand how computers work, that's also something that we're already at that stage where we have to understand how the systems, how the apps that we're using were created. It goes even from the point of privacy issues. So sometimes you use these apps and you give up everything about your life, you're not even realizing. And just having those basic skills and making sure that we understand the importance of technology in our life that is already here and how it's become everything that we're doing. I mean, like when you're talking about banks in South Africa, for example, Standard Bank is closing a lot of their branches because they, expect everybody to already be using their banking online. So that is something that we're already in it. So we need to make sure that everybody, even if they don't end up creating this platform, they should at least be able to know how to use them and understand sometimes how just giving up your data, how that can have negative impact on your life and even the people around you.
Are governments doing enough? In particular, again, I think of even 100,000 kids today, right? Mm-hmm. Ideally, we would have 1 million. Right? So are governments doing enough to help the general population to ramp up quickly on developing those skills that will be needed?
I don't think we are. I really don't think we are. And that's why, and I think for me, when education, I don't think is something that should be lived at the hands of the government anyway. Because the future of my child and my future, at the end of the day, is my responsibility. And sometimes some of the people that are in government are able to take their kids to the private schools. So their kids are still doing quite well. So for you to sit and say, I'm going to wait and they must do this, sometimes, when the resources are not enough anyway, they have to increase the taxes, which we're still going to fight and get angry about. And then we're still going to complain to say, well, they also are wasting our money anyway. So I feel like that's one sector that I feel when it comes to education should not be left to government. We have to be all responsible or take initiative to try and make sure that we can get involved and improve the quality of education.
But then the challenge becomes that the folks who are more aware and more able to act on this are the folks who already have resources.
Yeah.
Hence, I guess, the need for people like you and organizations like yours to try to even out the playing field.
Yes, I mean, I think, yeah, that's unfortunately, that's the sad reality. But if more of, us can get involved, then we can make sure that we can help. Because, I mean, sometimes it's not even, starting an organization and is trying to have 2 jobs. And that's really that's not what it takes. Sometimes just spending time with maybe your helper and just trying to find out, do you have kids? Where do they go to school? Just helping just the people around you. Even that, you would have changed one person's life, one life. And that's really all it takes. I mean, we don't all have to be, dedicating ourselves. I understand it takes a lot, and I don't think that's actually what is required. It's a choice, right? But we can still change the lives, the people where we have influence over.
One of the questions that was there before and somehow has disappeared, but is an important question, is what advice would you give a young woman who is interested in a career in STEM?
I think the only advice that they should go for it. They should go for it and find people that can help them and inspire them. And sometimes
find mentors and promoters. Mentors.
And some of the mentors also, you don't even have to meet them. I mean, a lot of the people that have a lot of influence in my life, I had never met them. I mean, it was like how many years before I actually met. Even now, when I'm talking about Dr. Miracle, we've had Skype, we've never met, face to face. So some of your mentors may not even be the people, somebody you know. And I don't believe that also mentorship, sometimes just living your life and doing, the things and people going and reading about the person who's doing the work that you are interested in, that can actually also help because you get to learn about their journey, you learn about their challenges. And a lot of these people anyway, you might find that they, you can, if you Google, a lot of these people, they've done interviews where they've talked about their life, their challenges, and you can learn a lot from them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a human being, and so that you can't use an excuse to say, okay, because I didn't have a mentor, then it means that I didn't, I can't reach that. There's books, like Sheryl Sandberg, Lean, if you are into leadership, right? So there's so much information that is available for a young person for them to still be able to succeed.
But it cannot just be about finding mentors. One is reading. One of the points that you have emphasized in a number of interviews is the relentlessness. You said, look, you've got to be relentless, you've got to be out there, and you've got to be stubborn sometimes. Tell us more about this aspect.
I believe that opportunity dances with those who are already on the dance floor. And you have to be prepared. You have to, if your dream is to one day, if I'm saying one day I want to be the president of IMD, then I must, try and find out.
Bad idea.
Yeah, no, but.
But pick something else.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if that's, the goal is to then understand, how did you get there? Just to understand, like, what does it take for me to be able to access this opportunity and work hard towards it so that if, I get that opportunity, I should be ready. Because it doesn't matter, like you can dream as much as you can. If I can say like now, tomorrow, I want to be the CEO of Facebook. But I know nothing about technology. I know nothing about how that, even if that job can be available and say, Lindiwe, apply, nobody's even gonna talk to me, give me an interview. Why? I'm not ready. So it's really about being prepared to make sure that if that opportunity, if and when it happens, I am ready. I can at least have an opportunity to be considered for it.
So good luck will show up, but you've got to be ready to dance with good luck.
Exactly. So even if my dream is to come to Switzerland and I don't have a passport, then you come and say, let's go to where I'm going to buy a plane ticket. I can't come to Switzerland because the basic thing of that can help me reach my dream is to have a basic passport, and I don't have the passport, so how am I going to get there?
So having strong mentors and supporters, preparing very hard, being very relentless, those would be the advice you would give this young women who want to study STEM.
Yeah, I mean, and not give up. Sometimes is that you may end up sending 20 emails until somebody answers just to shut you up, but then they answer, then you get what you want, right? And that's part of a lot of things that I do. If I really believe in something, I'll keep asking. And sometimes you ask, and you don't give up. And sometimes I might assume that you're ignoring me, and it turns out my email has been going to your spam. So I shouldn't give up and assume that you're ignoring me, right?
Can you please share with us 2 key challenges that you have faced so it says in your line of work and how you overcame them? I guess 2 key challenges, either in the line of work, so in terms of your private activity, or in terms of Africa Teen Geeks.
I mean, balance and making sure that the company that pays the bills, that is still sustainable and I can still be able to look after my kids. And then also from the nonprofit side, I would say the resources that we need to be able to, to do the work that we do. Because as a nonprofit, you depend on people being interested to support the work that you're doing. And sometimes some convincing people to say it's important to teach a child coding when they're 6. Some people don't think it's necessary. And then in a lot of companies that we've gone to, they'll tell me, well, why would you want to teach the kids how to code if they can't read? And for me, I don't think it's either or. Because sometimes they start, when they learn how to code, then it inspires them to be able to read when they start making it. And if they do not do well in math, if they learn the logical thinking that they learn when they code, then they automatically do better in math because they now have their thinking is conditioned for them to be able to do better. And sometimes just convincing people and just refusing to give up.
Now, you mentioned balance. One of the things that we were discussing just a bit earlier is there is an infinite number of kids out there, and there is an infinite number of teachers, and there is an infinite number of schools. There's an infinite number of things that you could be doing. And the danger for people like you is indeed this burnout that comes from caring so much that this ends up overtaking your life. By the way, this can also happen to people who are so passionate about their work, right? So how do you manage this? Again, given the fact that you have these 2 very important activities, you also have a family. How do you protect yourself against this burnout? How do you manage to kind of compartmentalize and maintain some form of personal balance?
Yeah. When it comes to my kids, because they're at the age where Africa Teen Geeks, the kids that we serve, my youngest is 9 and my eldest is 16. So they are a big part of the work that we do, and they code as well. And also if I'm able to travel with them, I take them with. And week I was in DC. My son was with me a few weeks later. Before then, I was in Vienna. My 12-year-old was with me. Next week, I'm going to be in Germany. My youngest daughter is going to be with me. And I try to, integrate them where, if it's possible, then I'm able to, to take them with. But, and then, there's like, simple things like, I listen to a lot of music that helps me, to relax. And also, I think when it comes to the work part, I also have insomnia, which is also a blessing, because I also get to do a lot of work when other people are sleeping. But then that also gives me enough time then to also, I finish work around 3 every day. And
you mean in the morning?
No, 3 in the afternoon.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Around 3 in the afternoon, and that enables me to pick up my kids from school. So that's one thing I always do. I pick up my kids from school, and I help them with their homework and whatever extramural activity that they do. That gives me that time. And then I read. And as I mentioned, again, music is a very important part of my life, specifically gospel music, because it can be calming.
So part of your answer is, look, my family is heavily integrated, and here I think it is important to say that your husband has also come to care deeply about this topic, yes, which we understand, because otherwise I think he would have been in serious trouble.
Yeah.
So he's now joined your organization,
yes,
and so you were telling me that he's kind of a sort of a COO and project management, yes, of activities. So this is on one side a family project. And you're saying also, I found ways of kind of maintaining my own sanity in terms of reading, in terms of listening to music. You were also telling me in terms of trying to stay connected with your siblings and with the rest of your family.
Yes.
And I think there was, it's a funny example, because you said, look, it is not complete rest, but it is some work rest, because...
Yeah, it's in the rural area, so every time I go home, I have no signal, so I can't check emails, I can't take calls, so it's really that forced... So
you go see the family so that you can be off the grid?
Yes, yeah. It's a perfect way to go off the grid without really going off the grid.
Here's a question. A big part of the success of most app developers is understanding the importance of intellectual property. Do you have the resources / the tools to enable the children to understand the importance of intellectual property, and also monetize their ideas and somehow record some of this intellectual property?
Yes. First of all, the kids that we work with are really young. And anyway, and whatever apps, whatever they develop is theirs. And also, we can't do anything, you can't take anything from them without the consent of their parents anyway. But we integrate a lot of education, so we invite professionals to come and talk to them about issues of intellectual property. We've got mentors that come and talk to them about even just the entrepreneurship part of it, and how to make and develop apps. And through the workshops and the hackathon that we have, a big part of that includes also presentation on how to pitch to investors. For example, when we had the hackathon now at the World Bank last week, we had one of the VCs from Silicon Valley, Ellen Brewer, coming and really teaching the kids how to pitch and talking about everything that they need to know for them to be able to successfully pitch their business. But also the part of, we talk to them as if they will understand, because most of the time they do. So we talk to them about why it's important for them to protect their intellectual property. And if you're going to present your app, how much, or your business, how much of it do you need to share, and what you don't have to share at the time. So that presentation she presents it the same way she does to actually other, professionals or adult people who want to go and pitch their business to inventors. So that is an integral part of what we do.
50,000 kids, 100,000 kids. Again, somehow it feels incredibly important, but somehow insufficient. How do we help you speed this up? Or what do you need, again, for this to become 1 million? Is it just a matter of money, or what's needed to scale this up to the level where it needs to be?
It's actually both. It's one, support with, obvious financial tools, which we're able to train the teachers, and we're actually creating a platform that the Minister of Basic Education asked us to start,
right,
which is a DBE 4IR forum to allow companies or individuals to donate to that so that they can be able to put computer labs at the school, and sometimes not even just money. If you can buy one computer and you take it to the school, we also look for actual resources that we can be able to use, but also mentorship, as I mentioned, like with the teachers as well. I mean, teaching coding and robotics is a very technical subject, and even if we're trying to make sure that the teachers are not the source of the information, they still have to feel comfortable enough, and that also requires having professionals that can be interested in just holding them by the hands, and not a lot of time, but just being able to, if a teacher has a question, have somebody, a technical expert that they can reach out to. So even that is something that is really important to us.
Any final thought you want to share with us? Either things we haven't asked or things we should have asked.
I think you've asked me a lot. No, but I think one final thought I would like to make, which is a point that I've already made, is, when being available to help some or being interested in helping some, sometimes it doesn't always take a lot. Just being interested and just, seeing someone, like it's little things, like if you, for example, when you walk around, maybe even at the hotel, just asking the person who clean your room about themselves and what they're doing, you have no idea how that validation would, because sometimes they feel like maybe I cannot even talk to you, and you may not know that just being able to be accessible, and for them just to ask you that question, how that can change their lives. So I'm just saying that sometimes you don't have to give up a lot of your time. Just sometimes just being kind and being nice to somebody and make them feel like they can talk to you and make them feel like they're human, that can go a long way in just inspiring and changing someone.
So the potentially disproportionate impact of simple interactions,
yes,
in people's lives.
Yeah.
Can you please give her a very warm hand of applause?
Thank you so much.